Okay, so thanks once again for the session that we had today. And I would like to begin with a question to both of you, I think, but I think, Anna, you will be perhaps more related to this topic. Could we have a couple of more microphones? Yes, thank you. We've been talking a lot about the importance and the logics between the sustainable development. And we also touched upon the users of the space.
Yes.
What would you say are the key elements and key drivers motivating occupiers to lean towards the, benchmarked or sustainable buildings as such? When you showed an example of
Yes.
the same street.
We were talking about costs before, but I'm quite convinced it's not costs, because the overall, if you have a company, what they spend on rent is like maybe 5 or 10% of their spendings. The most of their spendings in an office space, at least, is on employees and employee-related costs. So, and of that, 5 to up to 10% of the costs, how much of that would be energy costs? It depends, of course, in which market you are, how high the rent is and the energy prices, but less than 5%.
No, yeah,
less than 5%, I would say. Yes, at least in Sweden. So it's not cost that drives them, or I would say. It's more about them wanting to have something, an example of what they do to actually try to lowering their environmental impact. At least if I look at our tenants, it's mostly different type of service providing companies. So they either do, it's big banks or investment companies, IT consultants, other financial consultants, or anything like that. And if you look at their environmental impact, direct environmental impacts, it's mainly travels and the office that they rent. So they have to show that they are trying to do something about that part of their environmental impact, I would say.
Okay. So basically it's being socially responsible against their clients, partners.
Yeah, and their stakeholders. And I would say the key driver among those stakeholders are typically their shareholders or their employees.
Okay. Okay. And so these occupiers in your buildings, they are pushing for sustainable,
Yes.
for sustainability. But how? I mean, are they just pushing you as a landlord to provide sustainable solutions, or they're also getting involved in, in green leases or other initiatives that you as a owner?
Yes,
suggest?
they are definitely. I think we've signed more than 1,000 green leases with our tenants, and now it is so popular. So we've decided to include all the mandatory parts of the green lease into our normal or traditional standard lease agreement, because it doesn't make sense to sign green leases anymore because everyone is doing it.
Okay. So basically the Green Lease initiative is more of a definition of cooperation between the landlord and the tenant for energy savings.
Yes, energy savings, sharing data. Both the tenants and we... I can't find the word, sorry. We ensure that we will only use renewable energy sources in the building.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And some other things.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So even if I said cost is not the driver, of course, cost is still important. But I think most of the companies in Sweden right now are realizing that there are much more money to be saved on shifting from traditional office spaces into activity-based office spaces. And then you can save a huge amount of money.
Okay.
So in terms of what drives their environmental interests, it's not cost costs in the first. It's not the main driver.
Yeah. Okay. Well, from cost perspective, actually, it's obvious that rents in Sweden are higher because in Lithuania the energy bill in your overall rent expenditure would be 20-25%.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's
Yes,
even
so
more important.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, in Stockholm, we now have lease agreements signed at 600 euros per square meter. And we have quite low energy costs in Sweden. I don't know what they are here in. What do tenants pay per square meter in energy costs typically here?
Well, per month you could expect paying around 3 to 4 euros per square meter
A month,
for your
okay.
overall expenditures, service charges, and utility bills.
So then it's less in Sweden. So you see
Yeah.
there is
Yeah.
different.
The proportion is different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Edwin,
Yeah.
back to the edge.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Beautiful building. I've
beautiful
been there.
building.
Yes.
Oh yeah. So OVG was the developer, and
Yeah.
Deloitte is the anchor tenant. Who was actually pushing for such a high standard? The landlord or the tenant?
Yeah, it's a bit. I think the initiative to it has different levels because that area of Amsterdam is called the Zuidas, and the city council requires that every building which is developed there is a BREEAM excellent building, which is quite special, I think.
At least BREEAM excellent.
Yeah. So that's one driver, right? I also think that OVG is a developer with a no vision. So they're driven by the market, but they also drive the market. And I think they were the first to develop buildings with that kind of sustainable quality. So they had high ambitions as well. The third level was the tenant, Deloitte. They really wanted to have a sustainable building. And to give an example, when we started on the project, I think we worked 4 years on it. The starting level was excellent. But when we had the first design certificate, the ambition was raised by OVG to outstanding. So it's the only project we've ever done with 2 design certificates. So we had to implement more features, which were mainly on the health part. And at some stage, I think it was during construction, Koen van Oostrom from OVG wanted to make the building with the highest score in the world. So that was during construction, and that was done mostly on the energy level with all the generation of solar energy, not only on site but also off site. And it was a very special cooperation for the lighting system between OVG, Deloitte, and Philips. Because they had a development agreement for the lighting system, which was signed by 3 parties. The risks were, because it was a one-off, the risks were also divided between the parties, and that really, I think, shows that you can only get those levels of quality and sustainability when all parties, all stakeholders are in it and have the same ambition. We don't know if that's an answer to your question, but
I think it is. But just to elaborate a little bit on that, Anna, you were mentioning that in Sweden the tenants are pushing for BREEAM certified buildings. Since
or
2008?
LEED, or we use several different systems in Sweden. Yes.
Yeah. And Edwin, would you say that it's more or less trendish in Holland as well?
I think that there are a lot of. So if you look at the Zuidas, all buildings there are certified, but I don't think that all the tenants are looking for certified buildings. I think that the big driver in our market is from the investors, as I explained before, because they want to, like you, put your money in sustainable assets because they have a good revenue, they have a good risk profile in the long term. But of course, there are tenants who want sustainable buildings, but they're now focusing more on healthy buildings, I think, which is a sustainable building plus, right? And as Deloitte, and also I visited the Google office in Amsterdam, they are really into accommodating the healthy environment for their workforce, to inspire them, to get young people with bright ideas. So Deloitte calls it that the talent of war will be fought with the quality of the working space. So they really try now to attract people to their companies by offering them the best working environment, and that's really focusing on health and climate and a nice restaurant, nice features, so they really feel at home, and it's really inspiring for them to work. I went. If you look at this Google office in Amsterdam, I think that only half the space is really working space, and the other areas are, you see restaurants, you see lounges, you see fitness area,
yes.
yoga. They have beehives. They have their own. They're growing their own vegetables on the roof. So it's a complete working environment, and everybody's working everywhere. So people are even working in the, for instance, in the yoga. You can work everywhere. You can work in the restaurant. You can work on the terrace. Everybody's doing it. So it's completely different environment. And when I'm walking there, I really feel old because I think that the average age should be on the 30 years or something. So I don't know what's the perspective for us, but yeah, it's all about. Well, I think when you look at the user perspective, it's all about taking care of the people working there, and less emphasis on things like energy efficiency, which of course is very important and has to be done. Yeah.
So obviously, it looks like this war for talent is happening, and buildings, offices support that.
Yeah.
As a tool to attract the people. And actually it's very obvious trend in our countries as well, because we have a lot of newcomers entering the market, and they are competing for same people, and they use buildings, they use their offices to position themselves in the way they want to, and to attract people.
But I can only hope that this trend is not only for the office workers, but we do quite a lot of work also for logistical centers, because e-commerce is big in Holland, as it is here, I think, and we are trying to put more quality in those warehouses, because they're often, there's not much light, and the example that you showed with the Augustus facility is really, I think, the way to go. So don't only think about the high end of the market, but the same principles can be applied to also to industrial buildings, and those are the areas where the quality of the working area is, I think, relatively low, and could be much better. So let us also look at those kind of buildings, and not only to the Deloittes and the Googles of this world, but also look at the other segments. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, as we saw on some slides, that the office buildings are the ones being most oftenly certified, but we also have a proportion of industrial and retail as well. So probably this will also
perhaps it's less sexy, but it's just as important, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, good. A question about mobility and accessibility, commuting actually, work to home and otherwise. Is there a way you think that sustainable buildings can support people communicating, daily from work to home and other way? Because I saw in your presentation that you're using some vehicles. Are they? I didn't really get it. I mean, are they used for commuting people, from transporting people from the office buildings to their suburban areas?
I think it was our own cars that we use our technical management team
Okay.
uses. Yes.
So Stockholm doesn't have a problem of commuting, I guess. I mean,
No, but we are also doing businesses in some of the other cities where there is no metro. But we definitely have an important role to play. So we are, for instance, installing electrical charging equipment for cars and bikes that are becoming very popular in Sweden for the moment. And we are installing, or we are developing nice bike storage facilities, changing rooms and other things to enhance biking and other types of sustainable commuting practices.
Okay. Well, the origin of this question is that, Vilnius is a very car-dominant city, and we do have, issues during the peak hours with traffic jams, and basically people are simply using cars. There's a very small number of people using public transport or bicycles, and we also see that buildings are bringing infrastructure into new construction for cyclists, as you say, with lockers, showers, and everything you can get. And it seems that it is encouraging people to use alternative means of transport, but we are getting there very slowly. Is there something to take from more mature markets? How to speed that up?
I don't know. Without a good public transportation system, it's probably quite hard.
I agree.
Because here, as well as in Sweden, we have quite tough winter, so it's quite tough to. We see less bikes on the bike lanes during December, January, and February in Stockholm than the other parts of Sweden.
And more traffic jams.
No, but I mean, I don't think it's only property owners' responsibility. It's also things that needs to be handled by either the state or the municipality. In Stockholm, we have congestion charges, so it costs you quite a lot to take your bike your car into the city. Okay. And then you have parking charges that are really, really high. And if you, as an employer, provide that parking space for your employees, they will have an extra tax that they need to pay.
Personal tax.
Personal tax, yes.
So, okay, Stockholm went through the way of taxing things up.
Yes.
To decrease the.
That's the way we do it in Sweden. Yes.
Okay.
I think we probably have the highest tax pressure in. Yeah. Probably in the whole world.
And then we, I guess.
But you're second, yes, maybe. Yes, but I think maybe I don't think it's maybe the best way to do politics to tax work, but maybe to have high taxes on environmental impact is maybe a good way of moving towards more sustainable practices in the whole society, I think.
Perhaps a finding here that buildings without certifications should be taxed higher.
Yes, yes, definitely. That's maybe a way of financing public transportation, or that's a part of the money that goes into the congestion charging system in Sweden or in Stockholm. Now we also have it in Gothenburg. It's actually placed into better public transportation infrastructure.
Okay.
But I would also like to add that it's so uncool to take your car to work. Cool people take their bike and they spend more money on their bike. And that's why we can let bike storage facilities we can charge more for that very high quality, high end biking storage than we can do for a garage spot in the city center of Stockholm. Yes.
Okay.
Because I mean, a bike could cost 15,000 euros. Not a normal bike in Sweden, but I mean, bikers that are into this.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
And you have full bicycle parking lots in your buildings. Not in December and January.
No, not in December and January,
Okay.
but during the
Otherwise,
summer and
yeah.
also in the streets of Stockholm. It looks almost like Amsterdam nowadays.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, Vilnius is getting
And
in
it's
that
also
direction
good
as
for
well, a
your
little
health.
bit.
I mean, the thing is that it's good for your health. You
Mm.
save money, not if you spend 15,000 on a bike, but if you buy an ordinary bike, you save money. It's better for your health. It's the quickest way to travel around, at least if you don't live in the really, really far out suburbs.
Yeah.
So it's you get quite a lot of incentives to
Yeah.
change your traveling.
Yeah, yeah, and
habits.
as you say, I mean, it's probably the most important that the building would support that initiatives by bringing in the infrastructure.
Mhm, yes.
To use it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Same as you see in Holland, or
Well, I think we have generally quite a good system for public transport, because if you want to get people out of the car, there has to be an initiative, of course. And we also following, I think, what you're doing, offering bicycle facilities, showers, clothing rooms, stuff like that. Of course, public transport accessibility, amenities, stuff like that. But also we see a lot of attention for electric vehicles, either cars or motorbikes or bicycles. So in our buildings we are now implementing much more of those electric facilities than, for instance, BREEAM is requiring or LEED is requiring. So that's quite successful. I think you talked about taxes. Certified buildings in the Netherlands are, for a couple of years now, they have tax benefits for the owners. Not for investors, because investors don't pay this particular kind of tax when they are REITs. They don't pay certain taxes. But if you are, if it's on your balance sheet as a company, then you have benefits of certified buildings, or listed, technical measures like LED lighting or heat storage or stuff like that. So our government tries, although we are somewhere below, I think, in the European ranking as far as sustainability goes. But I think this is a measure which is quite effective. For the owner users of sustainable buildings, yeah. So our government's helping us.
Yeah, well, that's good through the incentive point of view, and I guess it also reflects to the bill of the tenant, because I mean, if it's a triple net lease and the tenant pays for some taxes, probably it's also reduced pro rata.
I'm not sure if they're doing that, but
yeah.
Yeah, but with us, I think the benefits for the tenants are mostly in the operational costs. Most buildings are the energy costs are built separately based on square meters, or more and more on sub-metering, of course, to the tenants. I think that's a bit different than what your practice is. So there's always the question of the split incentive. The owner has to invest in this building to make the operations for the tenant cheaper. So there's always a big discussion if there's a way of raising the rent, or so I think the most successful discussions, if you're not talking about rent and energy costs, but you're talking in the bandwidth of housing costs. So you can move some of the energy benefits towards your cash flow for your rent, and I think that's profitable for the value of the real estate as a result. So it cuts two ways then. Yeah.
Okay. So this incentivization from the government brings us to a point where, in your markets, is public sector doing some kind of leadership towards sustainable occupancy?
No.
Towards the occupancy of sustainable buildings, or assessing their buildings, making them better performing?
No, not in our country, no.
No, I agree on that. The public sector is not the drivers.
So they rather encourage market to use sustainable buildings, but not putting their...
Yes, and they do report on energy consumption and other things, but I would not say they're the most... They're not first in line in terms of asking for...
Once there was a time that our government developed standards for indoor climate, for instance, for offices, and that is still the standard. But after that, they said, "Well, that's not our role. We leave that to the market." And although they are the biggest, I think, real estate owner and leaser in our country, they're behind the market when it comes to sustainability. I'm afraid. Yeah.
They will get there, yeah?
Yeah.
It's a big market for you.
Yeah.
Good. Last question I had about the older buildings. Again, about, governments also occupy some buildings which pretty much are, older buildings and, living for multiple life cycles, right?
Yeah.
Is there a future for them? What would you say the future would look like for those buildings? Are there, for a development or upgrades or changes, major changes, to make them competitive again?
I think it's clear. We have had this real estate recession because we had much more. I think we have some 7 million square meters vacant real estate in Netherlands. So what you can see now is that there are transitions and there are redevelopments, but if the location isn't right, these buildings will never be redeveloped. So if the location is okay or is made okay, then there is a future for these buildings. Otherwise, these buildings are, we call them stranded assets. And I know buildings in my area, they are vacant for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And I don't think they will ever be vacated again, or are they? Again, if the location is right, it can be transformed. But if the location is not right, and there are many of those buildings, I think in the end they will have to be cleared. But of course, that's also difficult for the funds they're in, because they're in the books for more than they're probably worth. So that's a big discussion. In our country, probably I think also in other countries, what are we going to do with the stranded assets? What does it mean for the value of the funds and of our pension money, basically? So I think that's a big question. But again, there are a lot of buildings in our country that will not be fit for another lifetime because they're on the wrong location. Yeah.
I think I agree on most of what you said, but we don't have the same situation in Sweden with the higher vacancy rates, not at least in the major cities. So I would say the really old buildings are not a problem, because they are usually built in a way that they are easy to convert into new. You can use them for several purposes, yes. What we do see in Stockholm, Gothenburg and Malmö, where we have all of our buildings, is that buildings from the 80s and the 70s are being teared down, simply because they are not good buildings, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from a structural perspective. It's not good indoor environmental quality. It's low, what do you say? It's low ceiling height, yes, and low daylight, or not enough daylighting, and so on. But I do agree, if the location is right, there is always room for improvements and higher rents, better quality. So what we see in location, which is no longer a good office location, is that we see some redevelopment for residentials, because we have a very high shortage on residential units, at least in our major cities.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something that's happening with us.
And I also would like to add that an old building is probably the most sustainable thing you will ever find, because in terms of, we've been talking quite a lot of about energy today, but there is the environmental impact of rising a new building is so huge. So depending on where you are and what type of energy you are using, I mean, in Sweden, you have to use a building for at least 80 years to kind of cover up for the environmental footprint of constructing the building. So, I mean, we need to find ways to convert our older buildings to more environmentally friendly, because tearing them down and construct new buildings will simply not be the best idea. No.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
I was about
I
to
mean,
say.
concrete and CO2 emissions.
Yeah.
Have you dived into that?
Yeah.
Probably, yes.
I was about to say, is new always better than old? But
No,
obviously answer
definitely not.
necessarily.
But I agree. The location has to be right, because if you have a building in a location that is not right, it will never fly.
Is the property rule, right?
Yes, location.
Oh yeah. We have a question from the audience.
Yeah, actually, the audience have. There are a few questions on the slide from the audience. We can switch that.
Maybe you want to ask?
Sure.
If you could.
Of course. So the first one would be, we've heard lots about benefits of certifying commercial buildings, and residential certification is lagging behind. Why, and what could be done to boost it?
Residentials.
Yeah, residential.
Um,
A question for both.
for me or for
both.
of us?
For both.
Okay. Okay, if I can start. As I just mentioned, we have a very large shortage of residential units in Sweden. So there is a huge demand, nevertheless, in the condominium market. Yes. Condominiums market. And then we have a very, very strange system in Sweden in the rental residential part with a fixed rent agreement. So even if you have a very high demand, you can't hire the rent. So the landlord, they don't have any incentives to do things that can hire the rents, because they can't hire them.
It's a highly regulated market.
Highly, very super regulated market, and the only thing you can do to enhance your profitability is to lower your costs. So anything that will higher your cost will be kind of put away, or at least wait until the system is different.
What about for sale products?
Yes, there is a market for environmentally certified units there, but as I said, there is a huge shortage in Stockholm, Malmö, Gothenburg. So we see it, and especially because the municipalities are asking for it when giving building permits and selling the land, and so. But I would say it's not highest on the list when families are going to buy a new home. Location, how many bedrooms, and what the kitchen looks like is still more important, I'm afraid.
I think our market's roughly the same. I think the consumer is not so much interested in sustainability, and when they are interested, they are probably interested in the energy label, for instance, but not so much in the other aspects of sustainability. So I think the way to move forward in that respect would be energy and perhaps health as a setting point when you talk about sustainable housing. When we look at the investor market, there's a bit more interest in certified buildings, and I think it's the same mechanism as with other commercial real estate, the same principles of where you put your money as an investor. So I think there's at this moment there's some attention for from the investors again for apartment blocks which are sustainably certified. But again, for the consumer, it's when they're interested is in zero energy housing, for instance. So it's really focused on energy. Yeah.
I think I need to add that we do see quite a lot of certified residential development in Sweden anyhow, even if it's not a demand from a consumer perspective, because of the municipalities and also investors and lenders, because there are some residential companies doing green bonds as well. And maybe that's because we have a national, more narrow certification scheme that is highly adopted in the residential market in Sweden, which is not as costly as BREEAM or LEED.
Great. Last question to Edwin, dedicated to you. Yeah?
Yeah.
Technical question. What kind of software was used designing the edge?
Oh, I think it was simply the software everybody uses. Sorry. No, there was nowadays it's more sophisticated simulation software. I think the most software they used, the most sophisticated was the CFD model for the atrium. To study what it does climate-wise and energy-wise. But the projects I'm seeing now, there's much more simulation of daylighting, much more dynamic simulation of energy models and energy balancing and stuff like that. So, of course, the edge was designed 4 years ago, for instance, and I think in the last couple of years you see really a rise in dynamic simulation software, again for things like daylight, energy, stuff like that. Yeah. So, although the edge is a very, how do you say it, high-tech building, the design tools were not so high-tech at that moment. Oh.
Okay. Simple things.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Unless any raised hands, we will thank the panelists for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for participating. See you next year. Yes, Evalda says yes.